In the vast expanse of the Galactic Council's archives, buried beneath layers of diplomatic treaties and trade agreements, lies a single document that every species pretends doesn't exist. It's written in the flowing script of the Zephyrian High Command, stamped with 17 different alien seals of approval, and marked with a classification level so high that even mentioning its existence is considered an act of treason in 43-star systems. The document contains just one line: Directive 001, Omega. Under no circumstances shall any member species of the Galactic Empire initiate contact, trade, or conflict with the species designation human from the Sol 3 system. Violation of this directive will result in immediate expulsion from the Empire and forfeiture of all galactic protection protocols. What makes this directive particularly interesting isn't what it says, it's what it doesn't say. It doesn't explain why. It doesn't list the usual bureaucratic justifications. It doesn't even specify what humans have done to warrant such extreme isolation. But if you were to ask Commander Vextar of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy, the alien who drafted that directive with his own six-finger hands while his ship's hull was still smoking from plasma burns, he would tell you something that would make your scales crawl and your respiratory slits clamp shut in terror. Humans don't follow the rules. Any rules, even their own. This is the story of how one alien commander learned that lesson the hard way, and why every intelligent species in the galaxy now treats a small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of space like a cosmic quarantine zone that even the bravest explorers dare not approach. Commander Vextar of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy had served the Empire for over 200 cycles, and in all that time, he had never encountered a species that defied classification. The bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Edge, hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology as his crew conducted their routine patrol of the Outer Rim territories. The massive dreadnought, stretching nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, represented the pinnacle of Zephyrian military engineering and had never failed to inspire immediate surrender from any species foolish enough to challenge Imperial authority. The discovery began, as most paradigm-shifting events do, with something seemingly insignificant. Navigation Officer Kethare, her scaled hands dancing across holographic displays, paused mid-gesture and tilted her elongated head in confusion. The subtle change in her posture immediately caught Vextar's attention. Kethare had been with him for 50 cycles and was not prone to hesitation. "Commander," she said, her voice carrying the formal tone required on the bridge, "I'm detecting an uncharted system approximately 40 light cycles from our current position. The Stellar Cartography database shows no record of Imperial survey teams ever visiting this sector." Vextar's interest was immediately piqued. In an age where the Galactic Empire had mapped and cataloged over 2 million star systems, finding something truly new was rarer than finding an honest politician in the Imperial Senate. He moved with practiced grace across the bridge's polished deck, his ceremonial armor catching the light from the tactical displays. "Show me," he commanded, his deep voice resonating with the authority that came from decades of successful campaigns against rebellious species. The main viewing screen shimmered to life, displaying a modest yellow star surrounded by several rocky and gaseous planets. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing special, just another unremarkable system among billions. But as the long-range sensors gathered more data, something extraordinary began to emerge. "Commander," called out Science Officer Zalthek from his station, his normally steady voice trembling with excitement. "I'm detecting electromagnetic signatures consistent with industrial civilization. Multiple sources concentrated primarily on the third planet from the star." Vextar felt his dual hearts skip a beat. A new spacefaring civilization was the kind of discovery that could advance a military career dramatically. New species meant new resources, new technologies to study, and new territories to bring under Imperial control. The Emperor himself had been known to personally commend officers who successfully integrated previously unknown civilizations into the Empire. "Analysis?" Vextar demanded, settling into his command chair with anticipation. Zalthek's tentacles worked furiously over his instruments, his excitement palpable. Preliminary scans indicate a Type 0.7 civilization by Imperial standards. They appear to have achieved basic spaceflight, orbital construction capabilities, and planetary-wide communication networks. No evidence of faster-than-light travel or energy weapons beyond primitive chemical propulsion systems. This was almost too good to be true. A civilization advanced enough to be useful, but primitive enough to be easily conquered. Vextar had commanded successful integration campaigns against dozens of such species, and the process had become almost routine. Superior technology and overwhelming force typically led to swift surrender, followed by peaceful integration into the Empire's economic and military structure. "Any signs of defensive capabilities?" he asked, already mentally composing his report to Imperial Command. "Minimal, sir," Zalthek reported with what sounded almost like disappointment. "I detect what appear to be primitive nuclear weapons, some orbital defense satellites, and basic projectile-based military technology. Nothing that would pose even a minor threat to Imperial forces." Vextar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This would indeed be a profitable discovery. The Empire always had need for new labor forces, especially ones with basic technological capabilities that could be enhanced with Imperial knowledge. These creatures, whoever they were, would soon learn the benefits of serving the galaxy's greatest civilization. "Initiate standard first contact protocols," he ordered. "I want a full tactical analysis of their military capabilities, population centers, and resource distribution. Prepare a diplomatic envoy, but keep weapons systems on standby. We'll offer them the choice between peaceful integration and forceful subjugation." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, implementing procedures they had followed countless times before. The Dominion's Edge adjusted course toward the uncharted system, its massive engines propelling the dreadnought through hyperspace at speeds that would have been incomprehensible to the primitive inhabitants of the target world. As they traveled, more data began to flow in from the long-range sensors. The third planet was remarkably diverse, with vast oceans, multiple continents, and a wide variety of climatic zones. The electromagnetic signatures suggested a population in the billions, spread across numerous settlements of varying sizes. Most intriguingly, the species appear to have achieved a remarkable level of technological development despite being confined to a single world. "Fascinating," murmured Zalthek as he studied the incoming data. "Commander, these beings appear to have developed multiple competing governmental structures. Our cultural analysis algorithms are detecting at least 200 separate political entities, many of which appear to be in various states of conflict with one another." Vextar nodded approvingly. Divided civilizations were always easier to conquer. The Empire's standard strategy was to ally with one or more factions, provide them with limited technological assistance, and then gradually assume control as the grateful natives became dependent on Imperial support. It was a strategy that had worked flawlessly for over 1,000 cycles. "Excellent. A fractured species will be simple to manipulate. Identify the most powerful factions and prepare initial contact scenarios. We'll begin with standard Imperial diplomatic overtures." The journey to the mysterious system took 3 standard cycles, during which time the crew gathered increasingly detailed information about their targets. The species called themselves humans, according to their own electromagnetic communications, and they appear to be bipedal mammals with relatively short lifespans and rapid reproductive cycles. Their technology was indeed primitive by Imperial standards, but showed surprising innovation in several areas. What struck Vextar as most peculiar was the humans' apparent tendency toward constant conflict. His cultural analysis team reported that the species had been engaged in warfare almost continuously throughout their recorded history, with periods of peace being notable primarily for their rarity. This seemed counterproductive from an evolutionary standpoint, but Vextar had encountered aggressive species before. Usually, a demonstration of superior firepower was sufficient to redirect their warlike tendencies toward more productive endeavors. When the Dominion's Edge finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, Vextar was confident that within a few cycles he would be reporting another successful integration to Imperial command. The primitive humans would join the Empire, their world would be cataloged and developed, and he would likely receive a commendation for his efficient handling of the situation. The first sign that this might not be a routine operation came when Communications Officer Telvan suddenly straightened at her station, her chromatophores flashing in patterns that indicated extreme confusion. "Commander," she reported hesitantly, I'm receiving what appears to be a response to our standard first contact transmission. Already, Vextar was surprised. Most primitive species required several communications attempts before they could even detect Imperial transmissions, let alone respond to them. What does it say? Telvan's chromatophores continued their agitated flashing. Sir, it's unusual. The transmission is being broadcast on multiple frequencies simultaneously, apparently to ensure we receive it. The message reads, Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Sarachun of the United Earth Defense Force. You have entered sovereign human space without authorization. State your intentions immediately, or you will be considered hostile. The bridge fell silent. In over 200 cycles of military service, Vextar had never encountered a primitive species that immediately demanded to know Imperial intentions. Usually, first contact resulted in awe, terror, or attempts to worship his crews as gods. The idea that these humans would immediately assume a position of authority was so unprecedented that he found himself momentarily speechless. Did they just demand our intentions? Science Officer Zalthek asked, his voice filled with disbelief. It appears so, Vextar replied slowly, his mind racing to process this unexpected development. Telvan, respond with standard Imperial greeting protocol. Inform them that they are being offered the opportunity to join the Galactic Empire and enjoy the protection and prosperity that comes with Imperial citizenship. Yes, sir, Telvan replied, her fingers working to translate the message into the humans' primitive language systems. The response came back so quickly that it was clear the humans had been prepared for it. Message received and rejected, Telvan reported, her chromatophores now cycling through colors that indicated severe stress. The humans respond. The people of Earth do not recognize any galactic empire or acknowledge any authority beyond our own. You have 30 minutes to leave our system peacefully, or we will remove you by force. The bridge erupted in laughter. Even Vextar found himself chuckling at the audacity of these primitive creatures, threatening a vessel that could sterilize their entire planet with a single weapons barrage. The idea that beings who had barely mastered spaceflight would threaten the Imperial Navy was so absurd as to be entertaining. Remove us by force? Weapons Officer Grimake wheezed between fits of laughter, his massive frame shaking with mirth. Commander, shall I show them what Imperial force looks like? But Vextar held up a hand for silence. While the situation was indeed amusing, there was something about the human's response that bothered him. The complete lack of fear or awe was unlike anything in his experience. Even the most aggressive species he had encountered had shown at least some recognition of Imperial superiority when confronted with a vessel like the Dominion's Edge. Telvan, transmit a tactical display of our weapons capabilities. Show them exactly what they would be facing if they choose conflict over cooperation. The transmission was sent, accompanied by detailed specifications of the Dreadnought's plasma cannons, shield generators, and planetary bombardment systems. It was the kind of demonstration that usually resulted in immediate surrender. The human response arrived 30 seconds later. Interesting technology. Our compliments to your engineers. You now have 29 minutes. This time, no one laughed. The complete dismissal of Imperial military superiority was so shocking that the bridge crew could only stare at each other in stunned silence. Vextar felt a cold chill run down his spine as he realized he was dealing with something entirely outside his experience. Commander, Tactical Officer Mexros reported from a station, I'm detecting movement from several of the rocky bodies in this system. Multiple objects are changing trajectory and heading in our direction. Asteroids, Vextar asked hopefully. Negative, sir. These objects are showing signs of propulsion and guidance systems. They appear to be artificial constructs, possibly weapons platforms. Vextar's confidence began to waver. While the humans' technology was primitive, the idea that they had managed to build and deploy defensive systems so quickly was unsettling. Imperial doctrine called for gradual escalation in situations like this, but something about these humans suggested that standard procedures might not be adequate. How many objects? He asked. Mexros worked frantically at his console before responding with obvious disbelief. Sir, I count at least 300 distinct contacts, all accelerating toward our position. They're coming from multiple vectors, including several locations that our initial scans showed no signs of habitation. 300 defensive platforms was impressive for a primitive species, but hardly a threat to a ship like the Dominion's Edge. Vextar began to relax slightly, reminding himself that superior technology could overcome almost any numerical disadvantage. "Time to intercept?" he asked. "At their current acceleration rate, approximately 26 minutes, sir." Vextar nodded grimly. The humans had planned their timing perfectly, leaving barely enough time for the Imperial vessel to retreat if they chose to do so. It was a level of tactical sophistication that seemed inconsistent with their primitive technology, but Vextar had faced clever opponents before. "Power weapons systems," he ordered. "If these humans want a demonstration of Imperial superiority, we'll provide one. Target the lead platforms and prepare to fire." But as the minutes passed and the human constructs drew closer, Vextar began to realize that he might have seriously underestimated his opponents. The approaching objects were not behaving like typical defensive platforms. Instead of maintaining formation or following predictable attack patterns, they were moving in complex, seemingly random trajectories that made targeting difficult. Moreover, they appeared to be accelerating at rates that should have been impossible given their apparent size and the laws of physics. "Commander," Mexros reported with growing concern, "these platforms are pulling acceleration rates of over 40 standard gravities. That should be impossible without inertial compensation technology, which our intelligence reports indicate these humans do not possess." "Confirmed targets locked?" Vextar demanded. "Negative, sir. They're moving too erratically. Every time our targeting systems acquire a lock, they change direction. It's almost as if they're anticipating our targeting algorithms." This was becoming genuinely concerning. While Vextar still believed that Imperial technology would ultimately prove superior, the humans were demonstrating capabilities that didn't match their supposed technological level. Either Imperial intelligence had been wrong about human development, or these creatures had somehow advanced much more rapidly than any species in recorded history. "Fire warning shots," he ordered. "Target the space around their platforms. Let them see what our weapons can do." The Dominion's Edge opened fire, sending brilliant beams of superheated plasma streaming through space toward the approaching human constructs. The weapon systems were deliberately set to minimum power, intended to demonstrate capability rather than destroy targets. But even at reduced settings, Imperial plasma weapons were capable of vaporizing asteroids and crippling most known spacecraft. The humans' response was immediate and completely unexpected. Instead of being intimidated by the display of firepower, the human platforms suddenly accelerated directly toward the plasma beams. At first, Vextar thought they were committing suicide in some sort of desperate gesture, but then the impossible happened. The platforms began moving through the plasma streams as if they weren't there. "That's impossible," breathed Zalthek from his science station. "Those plasma beams are hot enough to melt through Imperial battle armor. Nothing should be able to survive direct contact." But the human constructs were not only surviving, they were thriving. As they passed through the plasma beams, they seemed to be absorbing the energy somehow, their acceleration rates increasing even further. Within minutes, they had closed half the distance to the Dominion's Edge, and their approach vectors were becoming increasingly aggressive. "Commander," Communications Officer Telvan called out, her voice tight with stress, "I'm receiving another transmission from the humans." "Put it through," Vextar ordered, his mouth suddenly dry. The voice that came through the speakers was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its complete lack of emotion. "Unknown vessel, you have now witnessed a demonstration of human defensive capabilities. We trust you found it educational. You have 15 minutes to leave our system. Any further aggressive action will result in the complete destruction of your ship and the death of everyone aboard." This is not a threat. It is a simple statement of fact. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Vextar found himself facing an opponent that he genuinely did not understand. The humans had somehow neutralized his weapons, demonstrated impossible technology, and delivered ultimatums with a confidence that suggested they had the capability to back up their words. But retreat was not an option. The honor of the Empire was at stake, and no primitive species could be allowed to defy Imperial authority. If word spread that humans had successfully threatened an Imperial dreadnought, it could encourage rebellion throughout the galaxy. "All weapons, full power," he commanded. "Target their homeworld. If they want to play games, will show them the price of defying the Empire. As the Dominion's edge prepared to rain death upon the blue world below, Vextar had no idea that he was about to learn a lesson that would haunt him for the rest of his life and eventually change the course of galactic history forever. The moment Commander Vextar gave the order to fire upon Earth, every system aboard the Dominion's edge suddenly went silent. The humming of the engines stopped. The lights dimmed to emergency levels. The tactical displays flickered and died. In the span of 3 heartbeats, the most advanced warship in the Imperial Navy had been reduced to a powerless hulk drifting in space. Report. Vextar roared, his voice echoing in the suddenly quiet bridge. Chief Engineer Korthal's voice came through the emergency communication system, strained and confused. Commander, all primary systems have experienced simultaneous failure. Main power, weapons, shields, propulsion, everything just stopped responding to commands. I've never seen anything like it. On the main screen, which flickered back to life on auxiliary power, the human defensive platforms continued their approach. But now Vextar could see them clearly for the first time, and what he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about technology and physics. The objects weren't ships in any conventional sense. They appeared to be geometric constructs of impossible complexity, their surfaces shifting and reconfiguring as they moved. Some were triangular, others spherical, and still others seemed to exist in shapes that hurt to look at directly. They moved through space with perfect precision, as if they were ignoring the basic laws of momentum and inertia. "Sir," Science Officer Zalthek whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror, "I'm reading energy signatures from those platforms that don't match any known technology. They're manipulating space-time itself, somehow, creating localized distortions that allow them to move in ways that should be impossible." Before Vextar could respond, the communications system crackled to life again. This time, the human voice had an edge to it that hadn't been there before. "Commander Vextar of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy," the voice said, and Vextar felt his blood freeze. They knew his name. They knew his species. How was that possible? "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I am the director of Earth's Xenological Defense Initiative. You have just attempted to commit genocide against my species. I trust you understand that this changes the nature of our conversation considerably." The bridge crew exchanged terrified glances. Not only had the humans somehow disabled their ship, they had done so while gathering detailed intelligence about their command structure. The implications were staggering. "Ow," was all Vextar managed to say. "An excellent question," Dr. Vasquez replied, and there was something in her tone that suggested she was enjoying this conversation. "You see, Commander, you made several incorrect assumptions about humanity. The first was that we are a primitive species. The second was that we are divided and weak. But the most dangerous assumption you made was that we would be intimidated by your technology." As she spoke, the bridge crew watched in fascination and horror as one of the human constructs approached close enough for detailed examination. The geometric shape seemed to unfold itself, revealing internal structures that defied description. Parts of it appeared to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, while other sections seemed to phase in and out of visible space entirely. "What you're looking at," Dr. Vasquez continued, "is the result of what we call necessity-driven evolution. You see, Commander, humans have a peculiar trait that sets us apart from most species. When faced with an existential threat, we don't simply adapt, we fundamentally change the rules of the game." Vextar found his voice again, though it came out as barely a whisper. "That's impossible. No species can develop technology that advanced in such a short time frame." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong again," the human scientist replied with obvious amusement. "You're thinking like a typical galactic civilization. You develop slowly, gradually, building on existing knowledge in predictable ways. We do something different entirely. We iterate. On the auxiliary screens, data began appearing information about human technological development that made no sense according to imperial scientific models. The humans had indeed been a primitive species just decades earlier, confined to their single world with basic chemical propulsion and nuclear weapons. But then something had changed. 15 years ago, Dr. Vasquez explained, we detected your long-range survey probes at the edge of our system. Most of our governments wanted to ignore them, hoping they would go away. But a few of us realized that contact was inevitable, and that any species capable of interstellar travel would view us as either resources or obstacles. The data stream showed an incredible transformation. In just 15 years, humanity had somehow leapfrogged millions of years of normal technological development. They had cracked the secrets of faster-than-light travel, energy manipulation, and technologies that even the Empire's most advanced scientists barely understood. The thing is, the human continued, humans don't innovate the way you expect. We don't gradually improve our spears until they become energy weapons. Instead, we skip the spears entirely and invent something completely different. We call it paradigm shifting, and we've gotten very good at it. Tactical Officer Mex Rose suddenly straightened at his station, his face pale with shock. "Commander, I'm detecting energy readings from the third planet that are off any known scale. There are structures down there that are generating more power than our entire Starfleet combined." "Correct," Dr. Vasquez confirmed. "What you're seeing is the result of humanity's first and most important paradigm shift. We didn't try to build bigger weapons or stronger shields to defend against superior alien technology. Instead, we changed the fundamental nature of matter and energy itself." As if to demonstrate her point, the space around the Dominion's edge suddenly filled with a brilliant aurora of colors that had no names in any known language. The human constructs were doing something to the very fabric of reality, creating patterns of energy that were both beautiful and terrifying. "We discovered," the human scientist explained casually, "that the universe is far more malleable than most species realize. You think in terms of working within physical laws. We think in terms of rewriting them. It's a subtle but important difference." Chief Engineer Corthal's voice crackled through the comm system, barely controlled panic evident in his tone. "Commander, whatever they're doing is causing cascade failures throughout the ship. Our matter-antimatter containment systems are destabilizing. If this continues, we're looking at a complete core breach within the hour." "Oh, don't worry about that," Dr. Vasquez said cheerfully. "We've already stabilized your reactor core. Can't have you exploding and damaging our local space-time structure. That would be inconvenient for our research projects." The casual mention of manipulating Imperial technology, as if it were a minor inconvenience, was almost more unsettling than the threat of destruction. Vextar was beginning to realize that he wasn't just facing a technologically superior opponent, he was facing something that operated by completely different rules than anything he had ever encountered. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "An excellent question," Dr. Vasquez replied. "What we want is for you and your empire to leave us alone. Permanently. You see, Commander, humanity is at a very delicate stage in our development. We're learning to manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe, but we haven't quite figured out how to do it safely yet." To demonstrate her point, one of the geometric constructs suddenly vanished from visual sensors, only to reappear directly off the Dominion's edge's starboard bow. The space distortion created by its movement sent shockwaves through the dreadnought's hull, causing structural stresses that the ship's designers had never anticipated. "Last week, the human continued conversationally. One of our research teams accidentally created a micro black hole while trying to develop a new propulsion system. We managed to contain it, but it got us thinking about the potential applications of controlled gravitational manipulation in military situations. The implications hit Vextar like a physical blow. A species that could create black holes, even accidentally, was far beyond anything the Empire could handle. But what made it worse was the casual way the human scientists discussed such terrifying power. "The problem," Dr. Vasquez went on, "is that we're still learning through trial and error. And when humans experiment with universe-altering technology, the errors tend to be rather spectacular. We've had 3 separate incidents in the past year where our experiments nearly tore holes in the space-time continuum. Fascinating from a scientific perspective, but somewhat concerning for anyone who happens to be in the same galaxy." Science Officer Zalthek was frantically working at his instruments, trying to gather any useful intelligence about human capabilities. "Commander," he whispered, "the energy signatures I'm detecting suggest they're not just manipulating matter and energy, they're manipulating the quantum foundations of reality itself. This is technology that shouldn't be possible for anyone." "Exactly," Dr. Vasquez confirmed, apparently having overheard his comment. It shouldn't be possible. But humans have a long history of achieving impossible things. We're quite proud of that particular trait. Commander Vextar felt the weight of his situation settling upon him like a crushing burden. He had come here expecting to easily conquer a primitive species, and instead had discovered something that could potentially destroy not just his ship, but possibly entire star systems. The humans weren't just superior, they were incomprehensibly dangerous. Dr. Vasquez, he said carefully, what assurance do I have that humanity won't use these capabilities against the Empire? There was a long pause before the human scientist replied, and when she did, her tone had shifted to something much more serious. Commander, let me share something with you that might help you understand humanity better. We are, by our very nature, an expansionist species. We explore, we colonize, we spread across any available space. It's hardwired into our psychology in ways that most other species would find disturbing. This was not what Vextar wanted to hear. An expansionist species with reality-altering technology was the kind of threat that could destabilize the entire galaxy. However, Dr. Vasquez continued, we're also surprisingly practical. We've run the calculations, Commander. If humanity were to expand into the galaxy using our current technology, we would inevitably come into contact with other species. And given our rather unfortunate tendency to solve problems through the application of overwhelming force, such contact would likely result in the accidental destruction of most galactic civilizations. The human constructs were now surrounding the Dominion's edge, their geometric forms creating patterns that seemed to bend light itself into impossible shapes. Vextar could feel the ship's hull resonating with energies that his instruments couldn't even properly detect. So we've made a decision, the human scientist announced. Humanity will remain in the Sol system for the foreseeable future. We'll continue our research, continue our experiments, and continue learning to control technologies that probably should never have been discovered. But we'll do it here, in our own space, where the inevitable accidents won't affect anyone else. And if the Empire attempts to force contact, Vextar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Then we'll demonstrate why that would be a very poor decision, Dr. Vasquez replied simply. You see, Commander, the constructs you're currently observing represent about 0.3% of our current defensive capabilities. We've been very careful to avoid showing you anything that might be considered threatening. The number hit Vextar like a physical blow. If what he was seeing represented less than 0.5% of human military power, then their true capabilities were beyond his ability to even imagine. I'm going to send you home now, Dr. Vasquez announced. Your ship's systems will be restored to full functionality in approximately 10 minutes. I'm also going to provide you with some data that I think your superiors will find educational. Consider it a gift from one military professional to another. As the human scientist spoke, the Dominion's edge suddenly came alive again. Systems that had been dead began responding to commands, and the ship's various subsystems started reporting normal operational status. But along with the restoration of ship functions came something else, a massive data download that began filling every available storage system aboard the Dreadnought. What is this? Vextar asked. Technical specifications, DR. Vasquez replied cheerfully. Detailed schematics for some of our less dangerous innovations. Nothing that could threaten galactic security, but enough to give your scientists nightmares for the next few decades. Think of it as a preview of what humanity is capable of when we're being friendly and cooperative. As the data continued flowing into the ship's computers, Science Officer Zalthek began reviewing the incoming information. His expression quickly shifted from curiosity to shock to outright terror. Commander, he whispered, this is impossible. They're showing us how to manipulate quantum probability fields, how to create stable wormholes, how to generate energy from pure vacuum fluctuations. This technology is millions of years ahead of anything in Imperial science. And that, Dr. Vasquez said with obvious satisfaction, is what we consider basic research. The really interesting projects are classified far above my security level. The implications were staggering. If humans considered reality manipulation to be basic research, what did their advanced projects look like? Vextar found himself facing the terrifying realization that humanity might be the most dangerous species in galactic history. One final thing, the human scientist added as the Dominion's edge began moving away from Earth under its own power. Commander, I want you to understand something very important. Humanity has no interest in conquest, expansion, or galactic domination. We're perfectly content to remain in our own system, pursuing our research, and trying not to accidentally destroy the universe. The human constructs began withdrawing, their impossible geometries folding back into configurations that were somehow even more incomprehensible than before. But Dr. Vasquez concluded, and her tone carried a warning that made Vex Star's scales crawl. If anyone threatens Earth, threatens humanity, or attempts to force us into contact that we don't want, we will respond with the full extent of our capabilities. And given our rather unfortunate tendency toward over-engineering solutions to problems, such a response would likely be permanent, comprehensive, and utterly devastating to everyone involved. As the Dominion's edge reached the edge of the Sol system, Vextar took one final look at the small blue world that had just redefined his understanding of what was possible in the universe. He now understood that he had encountered something far beyond Imperial comprehension of species that could casually rewrite the laws of physics, and was politely asking the galaxy to leave them alone. The question that haunted him as his ship jumped to hyperspace was simple and terrifying. What would happen if humanity ever decided to stop being polite? The Imperial Council chamber on Zephyria Prime was a monument to bureaucratic grandeur. Towering crystalline walls rose hundreds of meters into the air, their surfaces embedded with holographic displays showing the current status of the Empire's territories. Representatives from 47 different species sat in perfectly arranged tiers, their various forms of alien physiology accommodated by specialized seating that had been designed over millennia of diplomatic evolution. Commander Vextar stood in the center of the chamber, his dress uniform bearing the battle honors of 24 successful campaigns. But today, those honors felt like weights dragging him down rather than symbols of pride. The data crystals in his hands contained information that would fundamentally challenge everything the Empire believed about its place in the galaxy. High Chancellor Morthak, a massive crystalline being whose species had been among the Empire's founding members, gestured for silence with one of his many articulated appendages. The chamber fell quiet, thousands of alien eyes focusing on the lone Zephyrian officer who had requested this emergency session. Commander Vextar, the High Chancellor's voice resonated through the chamber with harmonics that could shatter glass. You have claimed to have discovered a new species that poses what you term an existential threat to galactic civilization. Given your distinguished service record, we have agreed to hear your report. Proceed. Vextar activated the holographic projectors built into the chamber's floor. The image of Earth appeared above the assembled representatives, rotating slowly to show its blue oceans and green continents. Murmurs of interest rippled through the chamber. Primitive worlds were common discoveries, after all. Honored representatives, Vextar began, his voice carefully controlled despite the turmoil in his thoughts. 3 cycles ago, I made contact with the species known as humans from the Sol 3 system. Initial intelligence suggested a Type 0.7 civilization with minimal defensive capabilities. I prepared to initiate standard integration protocols. Senator Klexnara of the Vorthan Collective raised one of her tentacled arms. The Vorthans were known for their analytical minds and skeptical nature, which made them valuable members of the Council's Intelligence Oversight Committee. Commander, she interjected, your preliminary reports indicated successful resolution of the contact scenario. Why are we now discussing an existential threat? Vextar felt his mouth go dry. The initial reports he had filed upon returning to Imperial space had been necessarily vague, pending the current briefing. He had deliberately understated the severity of the situation while he tried to process what he had experienced. Senator Klexnara, I must inform the Council that my initial assessment was catastrophically incorrect. The humans are not a Type 0.7 civilization. They're something entirely outside our classification system. He activated the next holographic sequence, showing the technical data that the humans had provided. The chamber filled with 3-dimensional representations of impossible technologies, devices that manipulated fundamental forces, engines that bent space-time, weapons that could destabilize matter at the quantum level. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Representatives from dozens of species began talking at once, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony that echoed through the chamber. Fear, disbelief, and outrage competed for dominance in their voices. Silence. High Chancellor Morthak's harmonic voice cut through the noise like a blade. Commander, explain these technological specifications. Our best scientists will require cycles to even understand the basic principles involved. That is precisely the problem, Vextar replied grimly. The humans didn't just develop this technology, they invented it from scratch in less than 15 years. When they detected our survey probes, they made a decision to become capable of defending themselves against any galactic threat. He activated another display, showing the timeline of human technological development. The exponential curve was so steep that it appeared almost vertical on the graph. This is impossible, declared Chief Scientist Vor then of the academic hegemony. The academics were the Empire's primary research institution, responsible for most technological advancement over the past millennium. No species can achieve such rapid development without external assistance. They must have obtained this technology from another source. I considered that possibility, Vextar admitted. However, my analysis of their communication patterns, cultural development, and technological implementation suggests that everything they showed me was of purely human origin. They didn't reverse engineer existing technology, they created entirely new paradigms. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If humans could advance from primitive spaceflight to reality manipulation in 15 years, what would they be capable of in another 15? Or 50? Or 100? Admiral Gaxthal of the Imperial Navy leaned forward in his specialized combat chair. The Gaxthal species had served as the Empire's primary military force for over 3 centuries, and their tactical insights were highly respected. Commander, the Admiral's gravelly voice echoed through the chamber. Regardless of their technological capabilities, surely they could be contained through conventional military strategy. No single world can stand against the combined might of the Imperial fleet. Vextar felt a chill run down his spine. He had hoped to avoid this particular discussion, but it was inevitable. Admiral, with respect, that assumption would be fatal to the Empire. The humans made it very clear that any attempt at military action against their world would result in what they termed permanent and comprehensive retaliation. Based on what I observed of their capabilities, I believe they have the power to follow through on that threat. He activated another holographic display, showing the sensor readings from his encounter with the human defensive platforms. The energy signatures were unlike anything in Imperial databases, suggesting technologies that operated by entirely different physical principles. These readings, Chief Scientist Vor then, examined the data with obvious fascination. They suggest manipulation of space-time itself. If accurate, these humans have achieved a level of scientific understanding that our civilization has been working toward for millennia. More than that, Vextar added reluctantly, they made it clear that what I witnessed represented less than 1% of their actual defensive capabilities. They were, in their words, being polite. The chamber fell silent. The idea that a single world could pose a genuine threat to the Galactic Empire was so unprecedented that most representatives seemed unable to process the concept. Senator Klexnara raised her tentacle again, her voice carefully controlled. Commander, you're asking us to believe that a previously unknown species has somehow achieved technological supremacy over the entire galaxy in the span of 15 standard years. Surely you understand how that sounds to rational minds. I understand completely, Vextar replied, which is why I brought evidence. He activated the human data downloads that had been transferred to his ship during the encounter. The holographic displays filled with technical specifications so advanced that they made existing Imperial technology look like primitive tools. Diagrams showed methods for manipulating matter at the quantum level, for creating stable artificial gravity fields, for generating energy from the quantum vacuum itself. The reaction from the assembled scientists was immediate and profound. Chief Scientist Vor then stood up so quickly that his mobility platform nearly tipped over, his sensory organs fixed on the impossible mathematics floating in the air above the chamber. This is revolutionary, he breathed. These equations describe methods for manipulating fundamental forces that we didn't even know existed. If this is accurate, they've solved problems that have puzzled our greatest minds for centuries. And, according to the humans, Vextar added with grim satisfaction, this represents what they consider basic research. Their advanced projects are apparently classified beyond the security clearance of their own military commanders. High Chancellor Morthax's crystalline form resonated with harmonics that indicated deep contemplation. The Chancellor had guided the Empire through countless crises over his extended lifespan, but this situation was unlike anything in recorded history. Commander, the Chancellor said slowly, what were the humans' specific demands? They made no demands, Vextar replied, and this seemed to surprise the assembled representatives even more than the technological displays. They simply requested that the Empire leave them alone. According to their spokesperson, humanity has no interest in galactic expansion, conquest, or even contact. They wish to remain in their own system and continue their research without interference. And if we refuse their request, Admiral Gaxthal inquired, then they will demonstrate why compliance is in our best interests, Vextar said quietly. Their exact words were that any attempt to force contact would result in permanent, comprehensive, and utterly devastating retaliation. The chamber erupted again, but this time the tone was different. Fear was beginning to creep into the voices of the representatives as they grappled with the implications of Vextar's report. You're suggesting, Senator Klexnara said slowly, that we should simply ignore an entire star system because its inhabitants asked us to? I'm suggesting, Vextar replied firmly, that attempting to force contact with humanity would be the last mistake the Empire ever makes. To emphasize his point, he activated a final holographic display one that showed the mathematical models his science officer had developed based on the human technology demonstrations. The projections were terrifying in their implications. If humanity decided to apply their reality manipulation technology in a military context, they could potentially destabilize entire stellar regions. According to our best analysis, Vextar continued, human technology operates on principles that could allow them to manipulate matter and energy on a galactic scale. They mentioned creating accidental black holes, as if it were a minor laboratory incident. They discussed tearing holes in space-time as a research setback to be avoided. Chief Scientist Vor then was frantically working on a portable computational device, running calculations based on the human data. His conclusion, when it came, drained what little color remained from his already pale features. If these specifications are accurate, he announced to the chamber, and if humans have the ability to scale their technology to military applications, they could theoretically destabilize the orbital mechanics of entire star systems. They could make stars go nova. They could create gravitational anomalies that would tear apart planets. The implications hit the assembled representatives like a physical blow. The Empire had faced rebellious species before, even technologically advanced ones. But they had never encountered a civilization that could potentially reshape the galaxy itself. There's more, Vextar added, though he hated to pile additional concerns onto an already overwhelmed council. According to their cultural analysis data, humans are an inherently expansionist species. They explore, colonize, and spread across available territory. Their current isolation is a deliberate choice, not a natural tendency. Then why? High Chancellor Morthax's harmonic voice carried undertones of genuine confusion. If they have such capabilities, why do they choose isolation? Because, Vextar replied, they're aware of their own potential for causing accidental destruction. According to Dr. Vasquez, their spokesperson, humanity recognizes that their technology is powerful enough to pose a threat to galactic civilization. They're choosing to remain isolated until they can develop better control over their capabilities. This revelation caused another stir in the chamber. The idea that a species would voluntarily limit its own expansion out of concern for others was almost unprecedented in galactic history. That's actually worse, Admiral Gaxthal said grimly. If they're self-aware enough to recognize their destructive potential, they're also intelligent enough to use it strategically if threatened. Precisely, Vextar confirmed, which is why I strongly recommend that the Council approve a general prohibition on any contact with the Sol system. The humans have made it clear that they wish to be left alone, and they have demonstrated the capability to enforce that desire. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Representatives argued about precedent, about imperial authority, about the implications of allowing a single world to dictate terms to the greatest civilization in galactic history. But underlying all the arguments was a growing awareness that they were dealing with something entirely outside their experience. Finally, High Chancellor Morthak called for silence. His crystalline form had taken on deeper hues as he processed the information and its implications. Commander Vextar, the Chancellor said formally, the Council requires time to consider your recommendations. However, pending our final decision, I am issuing an immediate moratorium on all Imperial activities in the region surrounding the Sol system. No ships, no probes, no communication attempts, nothing that might be interpreted as contact with humanity. And if other species discover them, Senator Klexnara asked, then those species will learn the same lesson we have. The Chancellor replied grimly. But the Empire will not be responsible for awakening something that could potentially end galactic civilization as we know it. As the session concluded and the representatives began filing out of the chamber, Vextar remained at the central podium, staring at the holographic image of Earth that still rotated slowly above him. Such a small, unremarkable world to contain such terrifying potential. He thought about Dr. Vasquez's final words to him about humanity's tendency toward over-engineering solutions to problems. If the Empire had learned nothing else from this encounter, they had learned that some problems were better left unsolved. The irony wasn't lost on him. The greatest military force in galactic history was retreating from a single world, not because they had been defeated, but because they had encountered something too dangerous to fight. As he finally left the chamber, Vextar carried with him the weight of a secret that would reshape Imperial policy for generations to come. Somewhere in a small system on the galactic rim, humanity was conducting experiments that could fundamentally alter the nature of reality itself. And the Empire's best hope for survival was to pray that the humans never stopped being polite. 6 months after Commander Vextar's report to the Imperial Council, the galaxy was beginning to feel the ripple effects of humanity's existence. The official Imperial directive was simple and absolute. Avoid the Sol system at all costs. But information, as it always does, found ways to spread despite the Empire's best efforts at containment. The first major incident occurred when the Krillian Trade Federation, a consortium of merchant species that operated independently of Imperial oversight, decided to investigate reports of advanced technology in an uncharted system. The Krillians were known throughout the galaxy for their aggressive capitalism and their willingness to trade with anyone, regardless of political affiliation or technological level. Captain Zexcaran of the trading vessel Prophet's Dream had built his reputation on discovering new civilizations and establishing profitable first contact scenarios. When rumors reached him about a species that had developed revolutionary technology in impossibly short time frames, he saw opportunity rather than danger. The Prophet's Dream was a massive vessel, designed more for cargo capacity than combat, but equipped with standard defensive systems and a full diplomatic suite. Captain Zexcaran had successfully negotiated trade agreements with over 300 different species during his career, and he approached the Sol system with his usual confidence. His first transmission to Earth was a masterpiece of commercial diplomacy, offering exclusive trade rights, technological exchange programs, and favorable economic partnerships. He was prepared for the usual negotiations, perhaps some initial hesitation from a primitive species overwhelmed by galactic commerce, followed by eager acceptance once they understood the benefits of Krillian partnership. The response he received was unlike anything in his experience. Trading vessel Prophet's Dream. This is Admiral Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. You're not authorized to enter this system. Turn around and leave immediately. Captain Zexcaran was puzzled by the curt response, but not deterred. In his experience, primitive species often reacted with suspicion to initial contact. He transmitted his credentials, a list of successful trade partnerships, and detailed proposals for mutually beneficial economic cooperation. The second human response came 30 seconds later and changed everything. Captain Zexcaran, we have reviewed your proposals. Earth has no interest in galactic trade, economic partnership, or any form of contact with alien species. You have 10 minutes to leave our system before we escort you out. For the first time in his career, Captain Zexcaran found himself dealing with a species that had no interest in the economic benefits he offered. It was so unprecedented that he initially assumed there had been a translation error. "Earth vessel," he transmitted. "I believe there may be some misunderstanding. The Krillian Trade Federation offers access to technologies and resources from over 1,000 worlds. Surely your people would benefit from such opportunities." The third response from Earth made it clear that there was no misunderstanding. "Captain, let me be very clear about something. Humanity has examined the economic and technological offerings available through galactic trade. We have determined that we have no need for anything the galaxy has to offer. Please leave." This was impossible, according to everything Captain Zexkaren understood about interstellar economics. No single world could be entirely self-sufficient, especially not a primitive one that had only recently achieved spaceflight. But before he could formulate a response, his ship's sensors detected something that challenged his understanding of physics itself. The space around Earth was filled with structures that his instruments could barely detect. Vast geometric constructs orbited the planet in patterns that seemed to defy gravitational mechanics. Energy readings suggested technologies that operated by principles unknown to any galactic civilization. "Captain," his science officer reported with obvious confusion, "I'm detecting manufacturing facilities in Earth orbit that appear to be producing materials with properties that shouldn't exist according to known physics. They're creating matter with programmable characteristics, somehow designing atomic structures that don't occur naturally." Before Captain Zexkaren could process this information fully, the Prophet's dream suddenly found itself surrounded by objects that hadn't been there moments before. The human defensive platforms had appeared without any detectable movement or energy expenditure, as if they had simply materialized out of nothing. "Captain," the human voice returned, and now there was an edge to it that made Captain Zexkaren's scales crawl. "You now have 5 minutes to leave our system. Any attempt to scan our facilities, transmit data about our capabilities, or approach our planet will result in the immediate destruction of your vessel." The Krillian captain found himself in a situation that his extensive experience had never prepared him for. He was facing a species that had no interest in trade, possessed technology that defied explanation, and was making threats with a confidence that suggested they could follow through on them. "Earth vessels," he transmitted desperately. "Surely we can reach some form of agreement. The Krillian Trade Federation has resources that could benefit your civilization. Rare minerals, advanced computers, medical technologies." "Captain," the human voice interrupted, "let me save you some time. We can create any element or compound we need through matter manipulation. We can build computers that operate by manipulating quantum probability. We can cure diseases by rewriting genetic code in real time. There's quite literally nothing that galactic civilization has to offer that we cannot create ourselves, usually in better forms." The casual dismissal of technologies that represented the pinnacle of galactic achievement was more unsettling than any threat. Captain Zexkaren was beginning to understand that he had encountered something far beyond his ability to comprehend or negotiate with. "Then why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "If you have such capabilities, why do you remain isolated? Why not take your place among galactic civilizations?" There was a long pause before the human responded, and when the voice returned, it carried a sadness that transcended species barriers. "Because, Captain, we're dangerous. Not intentionally, but inherently. Human civilization is built on a foundation of controlled violence and managed chaos. We solve problems by breaking them down and rebuilding them, often in ways that surprise even us. When we apply that methodology to universal forces, the results can be unpredictable. To demonstrate the point, one of the human constructs near the Prophet's dream suddenly began reconfiguring itself. Its geometric structure shifted and flowed like liquid, taking on forms that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. As it changed, space around it warped visibly, creating distortions that made Captain Zexkaren's eyes water to look it directly. "Last month," the human voice continued conversationally, "one of our research teams was experimenting with faster-than-light communication. They accidentally created a temporal paradox that nearly caused past and future versions of our solar system to occupy the same space simultaneously. We managed to fix it, but the process involved rewriting several local laws of physics. The implications were staggering. A species that could accidentally threaten the basic structure of reality was indeed too dangerous for normal galactic contact. But it was also too dangerous to threaten or antagonize. "We're giving you this information," the human added, "because we want you to understand the situation clearly. Humanity is not hiding from galactic civilization because we're weak or afraid. We're isolating ourselves because we're powerful enough to accidentally destroy things we don't mean to harm." Captain Zexkaren found himself in the unique position of being grateful for a species' refusal to engage in trade. If humans were as dangerous as they claimed, then their self-imposed isolation was probably the best outcome for everyone involved. "I understand," he said finally. "We will leave your system and report that this area is unsuitable for trade operations." "Thank you," the human voice replied, and the genuine gratitude in it was somehow more unsettling than the earlier threats. "Captain, before you go, please understand something important. Humanity bears no ill will toward galactic civilization. We simply recognize that our presence would be disruptive in ways that could harm innocent species. We hope that someday we'll develop enough control over our capabilities to safely interact with others. But until then, isolation is the only responsible choice." As the prophet's dream departed the Sol system, Captain Zexkaren carried with him a story that would spread through the trading networks faster than any official Imperial directive. Within weeks, every major commercial operation in the galaxy had received warnings about the mysterious system where a species had politely refused the greatest trade opportunities in galactic history. But the Krillian encounter was only the beginning. The second major incident occurred when the hegemony of pure thought, a collective of psychic species that considered themselves the galaxy's intellectual elite, detected the quantum disturbances caused by human experiments. The hegemony had existed for millennia as a union of species that had evolved beyond physical limitations, existing primarily as energy beings capable of manipulating matter through focused mental effort. They considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic evolution and had little patience for primitive species that relied on crude technology instead of mental discipline. When their sensors detected the space-time distortions emanating from the Sol system, the Hegemony Council assumed they were observing the death throes of a primitive civilization that had discovered forces beyond their ability to control. It was not uncommon for young species to destroy themselves through reckless experimentation with dangerous technologies. Arbiter Morthal, one of the Hegemony's most powerful telepaths, was dispatched to investigate and potentially preserve any useful knowledge before the inevitable collapse. He approached the Sol system in a vessel of living crystal, grown from his own psychic energy and capable of existing in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. His first attempt at telepathic contact with the human minds below was intended to be a gentle probe, designed to assess their level of consciousness and perhaps offer guidance in their final moments. What he encountered instead shattered his understanding of how consciousness could function. Human minds, he discovered, were unlike anything in his extensive experience. Instead of the ordered, harmonious thought patterns common to most intelligent species, human consciousness was a chaotic storm of competing ideas, contradictory impulses, and impossible creativity. But it wasn't the chaos that disturbed him, it was the power. Human thoughts moved through dimensional spaces that shouldn't have been accessible to biological minds. Their creativity operated by literally reshaping reality around them, forcing the universe to accommodate ideas that had no logical basis in existing physics. And, most terrifyingly, they seemed completely unaware of what they were doing. Arbiter Morthal tried to establish communication through standard telepathic protocols, but the human minds he contacted responded in ways that defied explanation. Instead of receiving his thoughts directly, they somehow reverse-engineered his telepathic transmission, analyzed the quantum mechanics of consciousness transfer, and built technological devices that could replicate the process. Within hours of his first contact attempt, the humans were transmitting responses using artificially generated telepathic signals that were more powerful and precise than anything he could produce naturally. "Greetings," came the artificial mental voice, clear and unmistakably human in its strange patterns of thought. "We are Dr. Jennifer Walsh of the Earth Consciousness Research Initiative. We've been expecting psychic contact ever since we detected the quantum consciousness fluctuations in this region of space. The casual mention of detecting telepathic activity, as if it were just another form of energy, was profoundly disturbing to Arbiter Morthal. The hegemony's mental abilities had evolved over millions of years and were considered among the galaxy's greatest achievements. The idea that humans could replicate and improve upon them in a matter of hours was impossible to accept. Ow, was all he managed to transmit. Oh, that's actually quite fascinating, Dr. Walsh replied with obvious enthusiasm. Once we realized that consciousness operates through quantum field manipulation, it was relatively straightforward to build devices that could generate and focus the same types of energy patterns. We've been experimenting with artificial telepathy for about 3 years now. 3 years. The hegemony had spent millions of years developing their psychic abilities, and humans had achieved superior results in 3 years of casual experimentation. We've actually been hoping to make contact with a naturally telepathic species, Dr. Walsh continued. We have some theories about consciousness that we'd love to test, but we need subjects who can provide baseline data for comparison. Before Arbiter Morthal could respond, he felt something that made his energy form recoil in terror. The human scientist was somehow reaching into his mind, not to read his thoughts, but to examine the quantum structures that made telepathy possible. She was reverse engineering his consciousness itself. Fascinating, Dr. Walsh observed as she casually dissected mental processes that the hegemony considered sacred mysteries. Your species has evolved natural quantum coherence in neural tissue, but you're only using about 0.3% of the available dimensional space. We think we can help you improve that efficiency by several orders of magnitude. The offer to improve upon mental abilities that have been perfected over geological timescales was so presumptuous that Arbiter Morthal found himself speechless. But before he could formulate a response, Dr. Walsh demonstrated exactly what she meant. Suddenly, Arbiter Morthal could perceive dimensions of thought that had been invisible to him throughout his entire existence. His mental range expanded exponentially. His telepathic sensitivity increased beyond anything he had thought possible, and his consciousness seemed to exist simultaneously across multiple probability states. There, Dr. Walsh said with satisfaction. That should give you access to about 12% of your theoretical potential. We could improve it further, but we're not sure what the psychological effects might be for your species. Humans seem to handle expanded consciousness fairly well, but we recognize that other species might have different tolerances. The casual mention of expanding his consciousness, as if it were a simple technical adjustment, was the final straw. Arbiter Morthal realized that he was dealing with a species that could fundamentally alter the nature of intelligence itself, and considered such power to be merely another tool for experimentation. What do you want? He transmitted desperately. Actually, we were hoping you could help us with a problem, Dr. Walsh replied cheerfully. We're working on a project to create artificial sentience, but we're having trouble with the ethical implications. We can build minds that are more intelligent and creative than human consciousness, but we're not sure if it's morally acceptable to create beings that might be superior to their creators. The idea that humans were struggling with the ethics of creating superior artificial minds, while casually offering to enhance the consciousness of naturally evolved telepaths, was so contradictory that Arbiter Morthal couldn't process it. You can create artificial consciousness? He asked. Oh yes, that's relatively simple, Dr. Walsh confirmed. The hard part is deciding whether we should. We've built several prototype minds, but we keep them in isolated simulations because we're concerned about the implications of releasing them into the real world. After all, if we can improve on human intelligence, what does that say about the nature of consciousness itself? As the conversation continued, Arbiter Morthal began to understand the true horror of humanity's situation. They had developed the power to casually reshape fundamental aspects of reality, but they were thoughtful enough to recognize the implications of that power. They could create minds superior to their own, but they chose not to. They could enhance other species' consciousness, but they worried about the consequences. It was the combination of incredible power and unexpected restraint that made them so terrifying. When Arbiter Morthal finally departed the Sol system, his consciousness permanently enhanced by human intervention. He carried with him a warning that would reshape the hegemony's understanding of evolution itself. Somewhere in a small system on the galactic rim, a species had achieved in decades what took others millions of years, and they were politely asking to be left alone while they figured out how to use their power responsibly. The message that spread through both commercial and psychic networks was simple and consistent. Stay away from the humans. They were not hostile, but they were dangerous in ways that defied understanding. They had the power to help or harm on scales that threatened the basic structures of reality, and their self-imposed isolation was the only thing standing between galactic civilization and changes too profound to predict. And so the galaxy learned its first lesson about humanity. Sometimes the most dangerous thing about a species is not their willingness to use their power, but their wisdom in choosing not to. 2 years after the first contact with humanity, the galactic community had settled into an uneasy equilibrium. The Sol system had become the most avoided region in known space, marked on every star chart with warnings that range from the diplomatically vague to the terrifyingly specific. Trade routes curved around it like water flowing around a stone, and even the most adventurous explorers had learned to respect the boundaries that humanity had politely established. But equilibrium, as any physicist will tell you, is an inherently unstable state, and the force that would ultimately shatter the galactic community's careful avoidance of humanity came from the most unexpected source: the Devourers. The Devourer war fleet was a nomadic collection of militaristic species that had spent the last millennium consuming weaker civilizations and adding their technology and populations to an ever-growing war machine. They recognized no authority, respected no boundaries, and had never encountered a species they couldn't eventually conquer and absorb. War Prime Carvex, the supreme commander of the Devourer fleet, had built his reputation on the complete annihilation of 17 different civilizations. His fleet consisted of over 10,000 vessels, ranging from massive dreadnoughts capable of cracking planets to smaller ships that specialized in harvesting populations and resources from conquered worlds. When the Devourers detected the unusual energy signatures emanating from the Sol system, they saw opportunity rather than danger. A species that could generate such powerful technological signatures would possess exactly the kind of advanced capabilities that the fleet needed to continue its expansion across the galaxy. War Prime Carvex dismissed the warnings about humanity as propaganda spread by weaker species trying to protect a valuable prize. In his experience, there was no such thing as a civilization that could not be conquered with sufficient application of force. The Devourers had faced species with advanced technology before, and they had always found ways to overcome superior firepower through numbers, tactics, and sheer ruthless determination. The Devourer approach to the Sol system was everything that humanity had hoped to avoid: aggressive, militaristic, and completely unwilling to accept any form of negotiation or peaceful resolution. War Prime Carvex transmitted a single message to Earth as his fleet took up attack positions throughout the outer solar system. Primitive species of Sol 3, you will surrender your technology, your resources, and your population to the Devourer fleet. Resistance will result in the complete extermination of your civilization. You have one solar cycle to comply. The human response came back within minutes, and it was unlike anything the Devourers had expected from a species facing imminent conquest. War Prime Carvex, this is President Elena Martinez of the United Earth Government. We have reviewed your demands and must respectfully decline. Please withdraw your forces from our system immediately. We have no desire for conflict, but we will defend ourselves if necessary. The tone of polite refusal in the face of overwhelming military superiority was so unprecedented that War Prime Carvex initially assumed it was a translation error. No primitive species had ever responded to Devourer ultimatums with anything other than immediate surrender or desperate pleas for mercy. Human leaders, he transmitted back, you appear to misunderstand your situation. My fleet consists of over 10,000 warships. Your primitive world possesses no military technology capable of threatening even our smallest vessels. Surrender now, or face complete annihilation. The second human response carried a note of sadness that somehow made it more unsettling than any threat. War Prime Carvex, we understand your position, but we cannot comply with your demands. Humanity will not surrender our freedom or our world to any aggressor. We are prepared to defend ourselves, and we strongly advise you to reconsider your course of action. It was the phrase, "we are prepared to defend ourselves," that finally triggered War Prime Carvex's decision to begin the attack. A species that claimed to be prepared for war against the Devourer fleet was either suicidal or dangerously delusional. Either way, they needed to be eliminated before their resistance could inspire other civilizations to similar acts of defiance. All vessels, War Prime Carvex transmitted to his fleet, commenced planetary bombardment. Show these humans the price of defying the Devourer fleet. 10,000 warships opened fire simultaneously, sending enough destructive energy toward Earth to sterilize the surface of a dozen worlds. It was a display of firepower that had broken the spirit of entire galactic civilizations and reduced thriving worlds to lifeless cinders. The energy beams never reached their target. As the massive barrage approached Earth, space itself seemed to ripple around the planet. The destructive energy simply vanished, not absorbed or deflected, but translated into something else entirely. Where there had been weapons fire capable of cracking continents, there were now streams of exotic particles that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Impossible, War Prime Carvex breathed as its tactical displays struggled to process what had just occurred. No defensive technology should be capable of negating that level of concentrated firepower. But the impossibility was just beginning. As the Devourer fleet prepared for a second bombardment, space around Earth began to change. Geometric structures materialized throughout the solar system, their forms defying every known principle of physics and engineering. Some were larger than planets. Others existed as mathematical concepts that somehow had physical presence, and all of them radiated energy signatures that made the Devourer's sensor scream with overload warnings. War Prime, his chief science officer, reported with obvious terror, "I'm detecting gravitational anomalies throughout the system. The humans appear to be manipulating space-time itself, creating localized distortions that are affecting our navigation systems." Before War Prime Carvex could respond, a new voice came through the communication systems. It was still recognizably human, but it carried harmonics that suggested technologies beyond anything the Devourers had encountered. "War Prime Carvex, this is Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. You have just attacked our homeworld. This constitutes an act of war against humanity. We are now authorized to respond with the full extent of our defensive capabilities." "Your defensive capabilities?" War Prime Carvex laughed harshly. "I command the most powerful fleet in galactic history. No single world can stand against the combined might of the Devourer Armada." "War Prime," Admiral Chin replied, and there's something in her tone that made War Prime Carvex's blood run cold. "You're thinking in